Hi, I'm Mark, host of the Shark Trust podcast, and I'm thrilled to announce that Series 2 is coming your way. This series is sponsored by Surfiers, so a huge thanks to them for helping this series come to life. At the Shark Trust, we strive for a future with healthy shark populations. And in Series 2, we're going to look at what that future might look like. We're going to be talking to scientists and conservationists from around the world, so keep your ears peeled. And while you wait, we have this special bonus episode from someone you might recognise. Hello and welcome to Series 2 of the Shark Trust podcast. We've got a very special bonus episode today. I'm your host Mark, and today I am joined by a naturalist, basically the world's action man and shark expert, Mr. Steve Backshall.
Thank you very much. The world's action man. I like that as a title.
That's how we refer to you at my house. Thank you very much for joining us today for this episode. We're going to kind of hopefully do a bit of a deep dive into you, what inspired you to be with sharks, and then I've got some very special questions from some of our listeners as well to answer.
Bring it on.
You ready to dive in?
Of course.
To start off, could you just kind of tell us a bit about what is it that kind of sparked your interest in wildlife? Was there like a particular moment that happened to you, like maybe when you were a kid or something you saw?
I'm very lucky in that my parents are both really into the outdoors and into nature. They're also very into animals, and I would say animals as opposed to wildlife. You know, we grew up on a small holding surrounded by rescue animals, donkeys, geese, horses, peacocks, all kinds of craziness right from a very young age. And I was really encouraged to get my fingers dirty, to experience the natural world in every single possible way that I could. And I very clearly remember seeing my first ever shark. I was probably about 9 years old, way too young, swimming off in the sea off Malaysia. And I saw the shark, and I can remember the absolute overwhelming, overpowering sensation of excitement, thrill, and fascination. And then, of course, utter terror, because I was just a kid. To me, all of a sudden, I was swimming next to Jaws. But in the years that have followed, I've realised that sharks come in all different shapes and sizes. Every single encounter with a shark is different. And there are shark species that can delight, that can excite, that can fascinate, that can surprise. And I still now, having been doing this for 50 years, still get excited every time I'm about to get in the water.
When you said there about your first experience seeing the shark, and you had that excitement and then you did have that kind of terror from it, is that something you think inspired you to then do so much work with sharks? To kind of change that perception, teach people what sharks are actually like?
So that, I think, came comparatively late on. So I can remember I was working on my first series for National Geographic in the year 2000. And I was doing this program on sharks and talking about the wonder of sharks. And I started researching, and this was kind of pre-Google, so I was researching in the old-fashioned way by going through the University of Florida's shark bite statistics list. And I just came to this realization that everything that I had thought up till that time, and I was someone who was working in conservation, working with animals all the time, everything I thought about sharks and shark bite and their threat to us as human beings was totally wrong. That was the first time that I sort of said for the first time on camera, you're more likely to be killed by a falling vending machine than you are by a shark. You're hundreds of times more likely to be killed by being struck by lightning than by a shark. And that realization that this sense of foreboding, of menace that we have about sharks is completely false. It's something that has been hyped by the media, by Hollywood, and has very little basis in reality. And so I think my first kind of step then was to try and make people see that sharks are amazing, sharks are wonderful, you should want to swim with them because they're awesome. And then, over the next few years, I started to become more and more aware of the threats sharks face. And that's when I kind of really put two and two together and realized that we're looking at one of the most threatened groups of vertebrates on the planet, a group of animals that have been around for 440 million years. Since before we had trees, we had sharks, and yet we could possibly lose them, or at least some species within my lifetime. And that was the firework under my butt that got me started in shark conservation.
That actually comes very nicely to one of our listeners' questions. The next one, this is from Harry Gard, another one of our fundraisers this year, and he would like to know what you think is the most endangered shark species and how is it that we can help it?
In terms of numbers, probably the most endangered sharks are those that live in or tend towards freshwater ecosystems, like the Ganges shark, the Borneo shark, both of which are right on the brink. There are many that are classed as critically endangered, and the ones that are receiving the highest amount of fishing pressure would be the blue shark that we have in our own waters, and things like the oceanic whitetip, which is again considered to be critically endangered. And these are all animals that are undergoing fishing pressure that simply cannot be sustained. The amount of numbers of those animals that are being taken out of our oceans every single year is horrifying to contemplate. And unfortunately, the majority of the 500 plus different species of sharks that we've got around the world are facing the same sorts of pressures.
And so this question is from one of our fundraisers and listeners of the show. This is from Keris Thomas, and she is 10. She would like to know, how can someone her age get hands-on experience in shark conservation to help them?
It sounds like she is almost the epitome of what someone her age should be doing. If you are a youngster who wants to get involved, who wants to do something positive for sharks, you want to join the Shark Trust. You want to join the Shark Trust, start fundraising, start changing people's opinions of what a shark is and does. And it sounds like Keris herself has already got educated, she's got the bug, she's fascinated. Those are the first things that people should do. So fair play to you, Keris. That is amazing and a great way to get started.
And then this one is a sister combo. It says Orla and Eden. So Orla was our fundraiser of the year last year, and then this year they both ran the Bournemouth Junior event. And Orla would like to know, what do you think is the best animal you've ever met? And then Eden is, why did you choose it? Why is talking about sharks and education so important for helping them?
When they say the best, what do they mean the best? Do they mean my favourite?
I think they mean your favourite.
My favourite. Okay, so my favourite, I have an individual favourite shark actually. So there is a particular great hammerhead shark who frequents the shores of Bimini in the Shark Sanctuary of the Bahamas. Her name is Gaia. She comes back most, if not every year, to the warm waters of Bimini, and she is huge. She is usually by the time she gets there, heavily pregnant. The last time around, she was ultrasounded and found to have 24 pups inside her. I mean, it's swimming an ultrasounding great hammerhead shark, apart from anything else, just amazing. But Gaia has cropped up on 3 or 4 occasions when I've really needed her. One of which was when I was filming, the first person ever to film great hammerheads live. It's being sent all the way around the world. Empty waters. They're about to come back to me. They're about to cut back to Steve underwater on the bottom of the sea in Bimini, and I was about to have to go, cut to someone else because there's no one else here. And there's Gaia. She big, glorious, great hammerhead cruised past me, and on 3 or 4 occasions she's done exactly the same thing. She is my spirit animal, so she is my favourite. In terms of how that helps me to transmit the messages of shark conservation, I think it's really important to have characters. I think that there's an awful lot of other conservation charities, when you're working with elephants or pandas or snow leopards, you can create those individual characters in a way that people really connect to, like they do to a soap opera. And with sharks, that's harder. But there is no doubt that sharks, big sharks anyway, have individual personalities, and certainly they have life stories. And being able to tell those is something that I think is universally fascinating, something that people really key into. So that, I think, is how Gaia has helped me telling the stories of shark conservation.
And with you telling all these amazing stories, you've done it through so many different shows. Like, I grew up watching Deadly 60. That's one that you did with Michaela Strachan and Nick Baker as well.
Really wild show.
Really wild show. So you've done all of these other ones. You've got shark, whale. You've done absolutely loads. Do you have like the all-time, like if you picture, say like Deadly 60, and you're like, what was my best experience with sharks? in those do you have, like one that stands out the most?
There's so many. I think that first time diving with great whites outside the cage is something that will always stay with me. It's something I will remember on my deathbed as being one of the greatest experiences in my life. I think salmon sharks in Prince William Sound in Alaska was surprising hard work. Took us some real effort to manage to get the shots and get the footage, and when it finally worked, that was pretty special. Oceanic whitetips off the coast of Hawaii, where we were, no baiting or anything, we were going out and following pods of pilot whales. And if you got it right, you dropped in behind the pilot whales, then you would find oceanic whitetips that were cruising behind them, basically, picking up on their scraps. And that was pretty amazing. In total blue water in the middle of nowhere, no land in sight, and just having, oceanic whitetips going around and around and around you. That was pretty special.
Wow, those do sound like incredible experiences. If I go back to the salmon shark one, and you said it was difficult to get the shots, is that because the sharks weren't turning up, or was it because it's really cold and just
it is really cold, so the water's not far above freezing. We got there not long after some quite intense rains, and the quite intense rains had caused runoff from the mountains all around, so the water was just like zero visibility, and so we were having these very classic V-shaped wakes at the surface from the dorsal fins of the sharks, but there was just no way we could get in the water with them because you wouldn't have been able to see them. They could have been right on top of you, you wouldn't be able to film them, and we were ticking down the days that we had there. And the water was very, very slightly clearing each day, and we were almost to the very last day, and it was pretty much with hours to go that the water was clear enough that we could get in, the sharks were there, and we just had one that stuck with us for about 5 or 10 minutes and then was gone. But yeah, that was one of those ones where you're biting your fingernails down to the quick.
And do you have many experiences with the shows where the animal doesn't quite do what you want to do, or it doesn't turn up?
Yeah, that happens all the time. The beauty of the kind of program that I do is that is always a part of the story. With the sort of things that Sir David, for example, does, where you've got these, super, super high budget programs that are designed to be the most beautiful displays of natural history behavior you could ever see. If you don't get that bit of behaviour, you don't even press record. Whereas for me, the whole process of finding the animal is a part of the programme. And if I don't find the target species that I'm going for, but I find something else, then I'll make the programme about that. And I think that there is a freedom to that. I mean, we're forced to do that because we don't have the money to be able to spend months and months in the field. But the freedom to be able to film anything you find, and for that to be a perfectly decent subject for your program, has an authenticity about it that I think people relate to. We don't go out every time and find our animal, and if we don't, we're honest about it. We try and find something else, and that gives you a real sense of what it's like being in the environment you're in and what else is there.
When you are doing these shows, and you're finding different animals, and maybe you've gone to see the same animal a couple of times so that you can't get it, have you noticed any changes throughout the time that you have been filming? Because obviously you've had quite a longer period now. Has there been changes have you noticed the changes in sharks or other wildlife as well?
Yeah, I would say the number one biggest change with sharks is increasingly finding sharks that are suffering from entanglements, particularly from fishing gear, from long lining hooks. When I first started diving with sharks 35 years ago, if we'd seen one shark that had a hook and line coming out of his mouth, we'd have been horrified. And now you see it with pelagic open water sharks, you see it every single dive. So if you're with blues, makos, or oceanic whitetips, you are going to see animals that are hooked, animals that have disfigurements, that have their jaws have been ripped apart, and that's it's an emotional thing. It's something that's really difficult to see.
And do you think, because obviously oceanic sharks in particular face this massive threat because it's in international waters, they don't have the same protections as other sharks do in their own waters. What do you think is the best way that we can actually help them?
I mean, I think that from a personal perspective, the main kinds of things that longlining is targeting is high-value food fish like tuna and swordfish, and the sharks are primarily bycatch. So, choosing not to eat those kinds of fish is a really good way to go. But actually, it really has to be bigger picture done through legislation. And that's the reason why I am proud to still be a patron of the Shark Trust after all these years, is because there's no one else who bangs the drum more than the Shark Trust does. The fabulous scientists and advocates that we have here are out trying to get things changed, trying to get things made better, trying to get legislation put in place that is never going to end shark fishing, but it can curtail it, and it can get rid of its very worst effects in a way that I think is vital.
Thank you. I think when I first came into conservation and kind of starting it, or just before I started the Shark Trust, I was kind of like, we need to just stop fishing sharks altogether. And then I've kind of learned by being in there that it is probably never going to stop completely. So you need to get it to that sustainable level where populations have the chance to rebuild. And we've had protections come in for like short-fin mako sharks in the Atlantic. Blue shark limits have come down. So hopefully we'll start seeing those kind of protections come up. And I think working with like our patrons who are doing their education and getting the public involved, we're then able to use that kind of engagement with the public to put pressure on governments to get that legislation in, which is, really nice. And it's nice to kind of all work together, I guess. Obviously, you've worked in, TV, you give talks to loads of people. You're about to give a talk now at Full of Sharks with the Shark Trust at the Royal Geographical Society in front of like 600 people. When you're on TV, when you're giving these talks, like, do you get nervous? And like, what advice would you give to someone who, if they were getting nervous, if they wanted to do this?
The TV stuff I've been doing for a long time now, and I work in very small crews of people, not much more than we are here really, 4 people, 5 people, all of whom are very close friends of mine. And no, I don't get at all nervous talking to the camera in that scenario. Big events, if I'm talking to a lot of people, yes, that can be very frightening. I've spoken at the Sydney Royal Opera House and at the Royal Albert Hall and things like that. And when you've got 4,000 or 5,000 people, that puts your heart in your mouth. But I've been doing it for a long time now, and I've just got to kind of get on with it. Otherwise, I would be so stressed, all my hair would fall out.
Do you have any advice for people who would want to be kind of the next Steve Backshall? Like, what advice would you give to the next you? What advice would you give to them if they did have those anxieties first coming in? Maybe they're doing their first talk in front of like 500 people or something like that.
I think practice. I'm going to give a talk tonight, and I haven't practiced it at all because I've been doing this for a long time. If this was 15 years ago, I would be sat in my room doing that talk over and over and over again. I'd be doing it to as many people as I possibly could. I would be just making sure that I was just ready. I was just ready. Just like if you were an actor preparing to walk out on stage, you make sure that you know your lines, you make sure that you're prepared, and get as much feedback as you can from other people. And that's really important.
Fantastic, thank you. And hopefully the listeners will find that helpful. I've had quite a few people who I've spoken saying, we're going to have you on the podcast, and they were like, oh, I want to be like the next Steve Backshall when I'm a bit older, so that'll be
I think that, if you're doing things like podcasts and you're doing things that are on camera, the number one thing that I could say is just talk to the camera like it's your mate. Talk to the camera like it's just a friend. Just get rid of all of the noise and just chat to it. If you ever come to the end of talking on camera and feel like you could say, and that's me, Steve Backshall, reporting from London, then you've messed up. It needs to be conversational. You need to draw people in by talking to them, talking to the viewer. And if you can do that, then you're halfway there.
Now, you spoke to us a bit about your favourite actual shark, singular shark. But we like to end the show in a certain way, which is where we ask you what you think is the best shark.
The best shark. Again, are we talking about my favourite?
What you think is just the best. It doesn't have to be your favourite. And we do judge you for what you say.
I think in terms of superpowers, the Greenland shark is pretty hard to see past. I have not yet seen one in the wild. The closest I've been to one is I've handled one in the tank room at the Natural History Museum. They've got one that washed up on the shore in Northumberland, right here in the UK, that is estimated to be over 300 years of age. And that is a comparative tiddler, because obviously they live to be well over 400, the oldest living vertebrate on the planet. Most of them survive their entire life with a parasite hanging off their eyeball. They're living in seas that are, if not 0 degrees, possibly even -1 degree. And they are a phenomenon that I would love to know more about. So I'm going, best shark is the Greenland shark.
A very good choice. So the first episode we ever did was with Paul Cox, our CEO, and when I asked him, he also said the Greenland shark.
There you go.
And I was really shocked. I was just like, really? Of all the sharks you chose that on? But I think it's because I picture it almost sad for all those things, like it's blind, it's in really cold waters, and they live for ages in the dark.
Yeah,
so
happy as Larry.
Yeah. But thank you so much for coming on.
So welcome.
And yeah, we've really enjoyed it.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Shark Trust podcast. If you would like to know anything more about the Shark Trust, please visit sharktrust.org, and then please check the show notes for links for more information. Thank you. This episode is brought to you by Surf Ears, the earplugs that let sound in but keep water out. Perfect for diving, surfing or snorkeling. Surf Ears 4.0 feature a re-engineered fused core and mesh design, paired with tough silicone rubber, making them more durable than ever. They're designed with sustainability in mind, using materials like ocean plastic and recycled silicone. We've tried them and honestly, they're a game changer. Comfortable, eco-conscious, and they actually work. Thank you Surf Ears for sponsoring this episode and keeping our ears happy and healthy.